Hello, I'm Bret and you're watching The Defining Moment for Creating the Culture of Conscience. Our guest today is Dr. Dietrich Seidel. Dr. Seidel is Adjunct Professor of Theology at the Unification Theological Seminary in upstate New York, and he's a lecturer of philosophy at Marist College in New York as well. He was awarded by the John Templeton Foundation for course development in the area of science and religion. He holds a PhD in theology from the University of Toronto. Dr. Seidel is a native from Austria and has been living here in the United States for over 30 years. Dr. Dietrich Seidel, welcome back to The Defining Moment. It's a great honor to have you here in our studio today.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Our topic today is the unity of science and religion, and I want to invite you to briefly share with our viewers a defining moment from your own life which led you to reevaluate the purpose and meaning of science.
I remember one day when I ate my lunch in the cafeteria of the University of Technology in Vienna, Austria, when I studied electrical engineering, and I was in the midst of my studies with math and physics and chemistry and all these subjects, and the question came to my mind: what is the larger picture around science? Where are we going? Because I felt we are learning so many detailed aspects of reality, aspects in terms of physical laws and chemical laws, electrical laws, and then how does it all work together? Is there an integrative picture? Is there a meaning, a purpose behind all this? And unfortunately, there were not so many people interested in those questions. But for me, it was like a seed to pursue that topic of looking at science from a point of view of its spiritual significance.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. How did the rise of modern science in the 15th century impact the Catholic Church?
If you look back in the middle of the 15th century, we have Copernicus as the first one who, at least one of the astronomers, who would more definitely come up with arguments for the heliocentric system. Heliocentric means that the sun would be in the center of the existing universe, at least for that for the knowledge of that time. And so he kept collecting more evidence from his observations from astronomy, and then we had a whole development from then on towards replacing the geocentric system, which means the Earth is the center of the universe, towards the heliocentric system, which is also known in the modern assessment of the situation as a scientific revolution, to borrow John Kuhn's term, right? Who is a history of science person, and so this first revolution was this transition from geocentric to heliocentric, and then we have Kepler coming, and then Galileo, and eventually Newton, who confirmed it beyond the shadow of a doubt that the sun is actually the center of our planetary system. But what did it do to the existing perception of reality of the people of that time, who largely understood reality based on the teachings of the Catholic Church? And the idea is that as long as the Earth is in the center and we are living on the Earth as human beings, so our meaning is enhanced through that. God intended us to be here on this earth, and we form the center of the universe, and so everything is stable and is as it should be. That was somewhat the background or the answer of the Church to that question. Now when Copernicus and Kepler and Galilei and Newton came along, then in that development, all of a sudden, man was demoted, right? Demoted to Earth, which is circling around the sun. So the problem here was to place a value judgment on human beings based on the physical arrangement of their existence, which means we are no longer in the center, but we circle around the center, in this case, circle around the sun. So that whole notion of geographical location determining the value of human beings is something which somewhat lurks also in the mind of modern scientists, that we would say, somewhat life and human beings is kind of a byproduct of this huge universe. So we are overwhelmed by the immensity of the universe, because the Milky Way as one galaxy is one of billions of galaxies, and this immensity of a universe of 15 billion light years of extensions, whatever that may mean. It takes it's a distance. 1 light year is how long the light is a distance how long the light the light would travel for 1 year and cover that amount of distance, but it's 15 billions of those light years. So we are just carried away by these immensities, and we then easily apply kind of a downgrading of the position of human beings, because we are no longer in the center, right? So for the Catholic Church, it was a situation to defend their position about man's value and God's intentionality towards our life on this planet. And that caused then what is known as the conflict model between science and religion. So in these early stages of modern science, there was a conflict towards the spirituality and the religious consciousness of that time.
Okay, very clear. Now, in the 20th century, with the tremendous developments in science and technology, there seemed to be a tendency for scientists to avoid being involved in the theological, spiritual, the religious realm. Why was that?
It seems like in the 20th century, which actually underwent a second revolution, a second paradigm shift, and that refers now to the shift from the Newtonian physics. We know Isaac Newton as the one who actually laid down the laws of motion and, as I said before, confirmed the heliocentric system. And then as we moved on to the Newton was in the 18th century, and then we have the 19th century, science kept developing. And at the beginning of the 20th century, what arrived on the scene is quantum physics, that we understood reality and matter is built out of atoms, which then behave in very strange ways, which can no longer be explained by Newtonian physics. New theories are needed to do that. And so quantum theories emerged in the early 20th century. And so then physicists and science in general seem to have taken a road of independence from spirituality and religion. Somewhat we divide up the territory. Religion is over there speaking about purpose and ideals and values. Science is over here explaining how the universe functions, and so then they would not interfere into each other. So in some way, this independence model seems to have applied in the 20th century.
Now, you mentioned quantum physics. In quantum physics, there's Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty, which caused, as you say, scientists to rethink Newtonian physics, leading to a new understanding of the nature of reality. Tell us more about that new understanding of the nature of reality.
Of course, quantum physics is not a day-to-day experience. We are not dealing with quantums, which means with elementary particles and their motion and how atoms are formed. We just hear about those theories, and so it may not be related to our everyday life, and we may not think that this has any importance to how we think about the universe. But in fact, it does have an important impact, how we think about this physical universe. And of course, one problem is that we are so close to the physical reality because of our physical body, and so many people identify their whole existence with their physical reality, and we forget that actually there's another dimension to our being, which we call the spirit, that we do have this spiritual reality, which is something we are still discovering. So to go back to quantum physics, what Heisenberg is stating, he's saying in the quantum realm, if you look at atoms and the behavior of electrons as they're circling around the nucleus, the proton in the nucleus. As these electrons circle around, it is not possible to identify the location and the momentum of this electron at the same time. We can only do one or the other. And that is against Newtonian physics, which is deterministic. But here is an opening in terms of probability functions. This electron is probably in that place with that momentum. And so what physicists come up with is they call it a wave function. Reality moves into the realm of probability and in the realm of being a wave which collapses and emits a certain amount of energy, and then we can measure that, and then we speak about a physical reality. But in fact, this physical reality is not as hard and fast as we experience it in everyday life, but it would teach us, quantum physics teaches us that there is a tendency to being. That's what is revealed. Tendency to being. That's all we can say. And when Einstein heard about that, he was just somewhat upset about it. He wanted to stick to the Newtonian model of definity, of measuring energies and motion at a certain location. So for Einstein, there was no question about it. So he thought eventually we catch up with that. But as quantum physics continued, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle held up. It is still what we teach in quantum physics today, and in that sense opens up a new perspective, a new understanding, and a new perception of the physical reality in terms of probability, in terms of tendency to being, and in that involving the background for that being the spiritual nature of reality, which feeds into that kind of theory of the universe. So, in other words, this was the second scientific revolution from deterministic Newtonian physics to the modern quantum physics of the 20th century.
Okay, and just as a follow-up question, explain to our viewers how the reality of this materialistic world that we take for granted as being so real and so reliable isn't really what we expect it to be.
Yeah, I mean, we do have Bohr's model of the atom. We know there's a proton and there's an electron, and the hydrogen, for example, is the simplest atom, one electron and one proton. And the electron is perceived as circling around the proton. And the interesting thing is that these are packages of energy, right? The electron in itself is a 2,000th of the mass of the proton. So it's very tiny, and the distance between the proton and the electron, if I make a model, let's see, I say the proton would be in the size of an apple, and the electron would be the size of a pea or the pin of a needle, maybe a 2,000th of that. Then the distance, just to have this model in mind, we would have about, I just name this, I'm not sure about the exact model dimension, but it would be a distance of maybe 2 kilometers, right, where the electron can be found on this enlarged model, right? So then we see, relatively speaking, all there is space, empty space, with energy packages in between. And the reason we feel a hardness is because the electron circulates with the speed of light, right, has this motion, and so we always hit the energy package which comes at a certain time. And so a whole understanding of matter itself is continuously being revised, especially as we go into subatomic particles. We start to split up the protons, the electron. We find the quarks which form then these elementary particles, and so on. So we keep on researching. We know CERN is quite famous in Geneva as having a big accelerator there, and every month or so at least there are reports of new discoveries of more elementary particles. So anyway, this is a tendency now to discover the nature of matter and reality. And the message is, it is not that reliable, or it's not at all what it seems to be, the substantial, reliable matter. It is a tendency to being of energy packages which behave according to probability functions. Mm-hmm. And what can we do with that? I mean, it's a new way of looking at reality. And the reason I mention all that is because there's always an opening to the background of our whole reality, which is the background of law and order. That all of this happens very precisely based on natural law. Atom has not a choice to act differently. It is always embedded in these probability functions.
Now, these natural laws that you just mentioned, by looking and examining those natural laws, what does that lead scientists to think about?
Yeah, actually here is one way for people who are not educated in physics or astronomy or whatever, or in science in general. We all are aware of laws. That is a common knowledge for people. And I would say the understanding of the laws becomes a window for our spiritual reality, that we are more than physical beings, that there is another dimension there which would explain, or which would be the cause for that physical reality.
Because these laws exist in a sense, almost in an invisible realm, is what you're saying.
Right. They're in another dimension. They transcend time and space. And so they have the quality of non-locality, and compared to any physical thing, every physical thing has a locality. Everything is described in a certain space and time dimension, and beyond that, any physical thing is subject to birth and decay, to creation and destruction. Right? It's here or it is not here. But laws are necessarily there. They stay in place and they transcend the time-space continuum. So it's a window to the spiritual reality of the universe. And in a way, scientists become more and more open as they approach the deeper dimensions of matter and realize the immense precision of the laws behind it. They would admit more readily that there is a causal dimension behind that, which we call the spiritual reality. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. In what ways have recent developments in science led scientists to advance the quest for understanding the origin of the universe?
As many of the viewers probably know, is that one of the major theories of the origin of the universe is the Big Bang theory.
Yes. And
to my knowledge, the Big Bang theory is still the best theory explaining the origin of the universe. And more information is coming in, especially as we send out satellites in outer space to measure, for example, the radiation of the afterglow of the Big Bang. It's amazing what we can do today. We can actually get information of what happened right after the Big Bang. There was some radiation, there's some information is coming in from 15 billion years ago, right? And so it's beyond our understanding in that sense. But still, the advancement of the quest of the origin of the universe in terms of the Big Bang theory is quite solid, and there's more and more information coming in. And all the alternative theories, like a pulsating universe, like the Big Bang and the Big Crunch, that it would alternate, right, is pure speculation. Nobody has really any data to back all that up, even if in terms of a creative theoretical experimentation it may have its place, but it's not really connected with any tangible data of exploring a universe.
The order and the beauty that exists is, it's unimaginable that this all happened without some guiding force behind it,
Right.
without a designer.
Right.
That leads us to intelligent design theory. Tell us something about intelligent design theory and how it goes about explaining the existence of a designer.
Of course, you could say in modern science we have a polarizing of theories. One is that we are living in a chance universe, which is Darwinian evolutionism. It happens by chance. Random mutation, right, for all the necessary parts for new species to emerge. And on the other hand is the intelligent design movement, which now picks up momentum in the scientific community, that things are arranged with a definite purpose, with a goal, namely the existence of life and then the existence of human beings as somewhat the crown of all these life forms which we find. So from that point of view, there is one additional principle which we can look at, which is known as the anthropic principle.
Anthropic.
Anthropic. Anthropos in Greek means human being. And the anthropic principle simply says, in order for the human being to come into existence, certain conditions need to be fulfilled in this universe. And because human beings are existing, these conditions are actually fulfilled. But then these conditions open up a whole array of so-called coincidences, which then would allow life and higher life forms and human beings to come into existence. So again, going back to astrophysics, physics in general, physicists say life can only come about if you have only 3 dimensions. If you have only 2 dimensions, we have no possibility of networks. No bloodstream could happen. We need 3 dimensions. Physicists are very open to the possibility of 4 dimensions, but then they say if there are 4 dimensions, the whole system becomes unstable. So it's just right to have 3 dimensions. Okay. So that's kind of one coincidence. And another coincidence is the expansion rate of the Big Bang. How does the universe, how did it expand? And it was fine-tuned to millions of decimal points, that the speed was just right so the universe would not fall back onto itself, become a big crunch again. So for scientists, that's another coincidence. And maybe a third example would be that in the beginning, but since we spoke about the Big Bang, there was an equal amount of matter and antimatter. And as matter and antimatter annihilated themselves, all there was a big light. So let there be light. That's what they found today, but nothing more. But we do have something. We have a leftover. We have some matter here. So then the theory is, or I mean the evidence is that between antimatter and matter, there was a slight preference towards matter. There was some leftover matter after this big annihilation happens, after this big light in the beginning. And that's what we find in the physical universe. And the amount of matter was just enough so that there wouldn't be major calamities of colliding galaxies, that they're spread out enough that they are safe and stable. So all these things, because physicists would know what happens if there are slight variations of these existing conditions of the physical universe. And so that is another argument towards the anthropic principle, that all the conditions need to be fulfilled for life to exist in its present form. And it started from the very beginning, from the Big Bang up the whole evolutionary process to our time. And it is like it's like a big symphony. All is working towards the fulfillment of life and the higher forms of creation ending up in the human being.
Okay, very interesting. Last question I want to ask you is, in what ways have near-death experiences contributed to scientists affirming the existence of the spirit world and life after death?
That's a very interesting question, because people are very skeptical about the spiritual realm, and they say, I'm a scientist. Science has all the answers. I don't need any spiritual speculation. But we do have scientists today who would actually receive funds from government organizations or from their universities to do research exactly on that point. What is the question about individual survival of consciousness? That's how it's termed scientifically. We speak about the afterlife, what happens after death. But as the information comes in, scientists would collect data from gifted persons, which are called mediums, who are sensitive to the messages of departed spirits, and these data are collected and scientifically researched, and very stringently researched, so that no wrong turn is here permitted. There are no loopholes.
No misinterpretations.
So science now applies its own principle exactly to those questions. And one study was made in the University of Arizona with Gary Schwartz, and his book was The Afterlife Experiments, and he comes to the overwhelming conclusion that actually individual survival of consciousness is a scientific proven fact according to his research. But hardly any media coverage of that, right? So we see that our whole perception of life and the significance of human beings as spiritual beings is still downplayed or is held back from the media, because it would truly be a revolution if we openly acknowledge, also scientifically, that life after death is the real existence. That's how reality is. We would shape up in this life. We would do our best to enter this life after this physical life in the best possible condition. So we would have a revolution in terms of living out good values, acknowledging God, acknowledging our true purpose in this life, and in that way forming a new society which can reflect God's original plan and the purpose of creation.
Wow, on that note, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Dietrich Seidel, for being our guest on The Defining Moment. I'm really fascinated to hear you share about your knowledge of the scientific and spiritual realms. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me here.
It's been a pleasure. You've been watching The Defining Moment for Creating the Culture of Conscience. You can find us on the internet at www.definingmoment.tv. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.